Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you My Killer Doesn't Understand Me by Thomas Mulkeen. This is copyright 1973 by Stein and Day. You can see here it says a Stein and Day mystery. And I think the cover is actually kind of cool. It almost has a haunted house Halloween feeling about it, even though the book has nothing to do with haunted houses or Halloween. But I do like the cover art, and it is relevant to the book. Stein and Day was an interesting publisher. They were not located in New York City. They were located in Westchester County, just north, at a little town called Briarcliff Manor. And they published a goodly number of mysteries in the 70s. And I've read enough of them to think that I kind of understand the editor's taste there. They definitely went for stuff that was a little offbeat, a little wacky, a little off the beaten path, and definitely some... they liked comedic elements in a lot of their books. You might want to check out a book that I've reviewed here called Murder Trap by Eugene Franklin. That was another Stein and Day, kind of wacky book. So let me tell you a little bit about the author, and then we'll get into the pros and cons of the book. Because this book has really good pros and really bad cons. So there's not really a lot of information about Thomas Mulkeen. He wasn't that prolific as a novelist. So it wouldn't surprise me if you had not heard of him before, because I never had. The reason I learned about him is that, as you can see, back in the day, publishers often advertised other books on their list that readers might like to try, and I have had a lot of good luck finding books by looking at these brief write-ups of other books. And I saw a description of this book, and I thought, it sounds interesting enough. I like the title, so I was able to find a copy of it, really very reasonably priced. So let me give you kind of the overall thing that's going on here. So it is set in New York City. We have a first-person narrator who is a private investigator. His name is Clem Talbot. And as the book opens, he's being hired by members of the Drumgoole family. These are a bunch of guys who have pretty successful in their lives and careers. But they have one brother, Daniel, who's got this really sort of odd medical diagnosis. I think it's called Korsakoff's syndrome, where he remembers certain pieces of his life, like almost certain, planks in a board, but not what happens in between those memories, which means that he then makes up stuff to fill in the gaps. And of course, the made up stuff is all totally wacky. But it is, a legitimate medical diagnosis. And what the brothers are trying, what the Drumgoole brothers are trying to do is just keep an eye on Daniel until they can send him off to retire in Ireland, their home country. And it's going to take him a few days to get out of the country and get him set up in Ireland. So they just want Clem to hang out with him and look after him and make sure that nothing happens to him, because the guy wanders all around New York City. He's frequently drunk. They know he's not trustworthy. They're really kind of afraid of of what might happen to him. Whereas in Ireland, he'll have a family around to watch over him. So it's kind of a fun setup, and Clem does befriend does befriend Daniel Drumgoole, and they hang out at lots of bars and have lots of funny, offbeat conversations. And the first couple chapters should have keyed me into the fact that this is intended as a comedic mystery. It took me kind of about 50 pages to realize that that's what I had in my hands here, because I was sort of thinking, what is this? What's going on here? You know, I guess I go in with a certain set of expectations, as we all do, and when you see that the author is doing something that you didn't expect, you kind of have to take a left turn, alter your expectations so that you're in sync with the author. And then once I did that, I realized, okay, this is just going to be one of those off-kilter kind of books where you just don't know what is going to happen. So the pros of this book are that it's very easy to read. It's fast. It's definitely fun if you can take your mysteries not too seriously. The narrator is engaging, and the plot goes off in all kinds of directions that you would not have expected. The characters are memorable, and a thing that I really liked is that the book takes place kind of all over the 5 boroughs of New York City, including areas of New York that we don't really read or hear a lot about. One main location is Red Hook, Brooklyn, also known as the Gowanus section of Brooklyn, which at the time of this book was really a dump. And when I say dump, I mean literally a dump. It is a super fun site. It's famous for the Gowanus Canal, which is reputed to be a dumping ground for dead bodies by the mafia, but mostly just horrible chemicals. You know, the idea had always been that if you fell into the Gowanus Canal, you would get sick and die very quickly because it was that poisoned. And of course, the surrounding neighborhood is poisoned too. So this is the 70s. I understand Gowanus has cleaned up a little bit. But back then, everybody knew that the Gowanus area was kind of the pits. And it's kind of fun to see New York not sainted as it is in so many books, right? Where people just think, oh, New York is the greatest city on earth and there's nothing wrong with it. But no one was a fan of the Gowanus Canal, even to this day. But there are also sections that take place in the Bronx, the South Bronx, and the author's really good with the geography of the Bronx, which is rather hilly and, it does take place in the South Bronx, which was troubled then and remains troubled now. But the author describes the neighborhood and the history very interestingly. You can tell he really did his homework and probably visited these sites and kind of got the feel for them. He then goes into Westchester. I feel like so many books I've read lately are taking place between Manhattan and Westchester. But he even gets the Westchester burbs, these affluent sort of rivertown burbs, I think very accurately portrayed, as these little towns with a center that is kind of surrounded by, I guess, what we call middle-class housing now. But then the further you get from the city center, the larger the property is, the bigger the houses, the more affluent the residents. And he's got some nice, nice descriptions of all of that. And if you live in the New York City region, I think you will recognize the truth in a lot of what he says. And if you don't, you'll get a view of parts of New York and its environs that you may not have known much about. So these are the good things, right? Just like I said, the kind of fun, rather non-linear plot with kind of wacky things happening here and there. And it's all like 175 pages of just enjoyable entertainment. But this comes at I don't want to say at a price, but there are certain things you have to, I would like you to be aware of before you decide to pick up this book. The first is that a lot of it makes no sense. Our private investigator is supposed to be, I mean, in the ideal book, is someone we look up to, who's savvy, who knows what he's doing, who has kind of, been around the underworld and knows how to get things done. And I have to say, Clem Talbot is pretty damn incompetent. There's a phrase often used to describe heroines who do dumb things called TSTL, too stupid to live. Well, that's not just for heroines anymore. It's also for heroes, because the things that Clem does make no sense. He puts himself in danger just, for the hell of it. I'm talking about, phone calls that say, meet me on the North Fork of Long Island, Oceanside at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'll give you information. He has no idea who the person is. He goes out to meet the person. You can guess what happens. He is walking along the street and somebody pulls up in a car and says, "Get in, someone wants to talk to you." He gets into the car. Who would do that? He knows that somebody's out to get him, that somebody's out to kill him, but he allows a very suspicious exterminator into his office. And the exterminator kind of blockades him in and pumps noxious gas into the office. And at this point, I'm thinking, dude, you deserve to die. You're just making one stupid decision after another. Can't you see what's directly in front of your eyes, right? Like, we pay private investigators to see things we don't see. And Clem is slow on the uptake. Either that or the author just didn't really know how to plot a book and how to make these situations seem a little bit more credible. So if you are impatient with TSTL characters and actions, proceed with caution here. That said, I found a lot of the writing to be a combination of almost like this naivete and good observation and good humor. It's like sometimes the author is really geeky and the prose feels a little bit awkward or discombobulated. And then sometimes he just delivers these observations and these one-liners that are great. Like, I keep mentioning how wacky this plot is. One character, they believe that he has been murdered, but it turns out that he's died of autoerotic asphyxiation. So this is 1973. I don't think any of us had ever heard of it back then, so it must have been something different. And the coroner explains that death by saying he was self-amusing by self-abusing. And I thought that was a great line. But there's a lot of really good, funny lines here. I guess I feel that a really good editor could have worked with Mulkeen to get his books a little bit more polished than they are. Like I said, he hasn't had a lot of books, and this is the only one that I've read. From his photo on the back flap, he looks like a pretty young guy. So he needed a little bit, I think, of professional development before he really would have hit his stride. Because, like I said, he does have some strengths. There's the most perfunctory romance you can possibly imagine. Clem gets quasi-hooked up with this woman, Irene, who's a young woman, and yet somehow she is the widow of a Civil War veteran. That, when she was in her 20s, her husband was 97. And that's just, you're like, huh? And he really can't, the author just can't get the romance off the ground or make it feel believable. The protagonist, Clem, lives with his mother, and sometimes it feels like they kind of have a Norman Bates and his mother relationship. He refers to her as mother. She's living at home, recovering from a stroke, and he puts her in danger, by his own stupidity. Everybody knows that she lives with him, and, he's followed, and there were dark, shadowy figures outside the apartment looking through his window, shooting. And he never thinks, oh, gee, maybe my poor mother who's recovering from a stroke should not be put in this kind of danger. So that kind of stuff just happens over and over and over again. But if you can get past all of that and you want something a little offbeat, I think I could actually recommend this book. It takes a special reader to appreciate what Mulkeen is doing. If you're looking for, a golden age mystery, fair play, deep character development, you're not going to get that here. If you're looking for almost like a PI sitcom, that's how I would describe this book. I actually think that's a pretty good phrase that I may end up reusing, PI sitcom. So if this strikes you as something possibly of interest, I'm sure you'll be able to find the book not expensively somewhere on the internet or maybe in a used bookstore. And I think the jury is out for me whether I'd read more by him, but it was so short and so quick. I think if I could find one for $2, another one for $2 in some used bookstore, I will certainly pick it up for when I'm in the mood for something very, very light, because this book is light as a feather. I should close by saying that the plot resolution is actually rather clever. The author does something that I don't really think I've seen done before. And I guess I was pleasantly surprised and almost impressed with that. The underlying problem here is, though, that, it's such kind of a local mystery, but it's tied into matters of national security, like missiles and, national defense, and what you think of as the subject of a much bigger, weightier book. And here, the two different scales, they're sort of like not quite gelling. You can't figure out how, how little Clem gets involved in, the highest level of the military industrial complex, yet that's what happens. So I guess it's not unlike Smilla's Sense of Snow. Did you guys read that book by Peter Herg? Another really bizarre book, and frankly better than this one. But it starts out with Smilla, Miss Smilla Jesperson. A young boy from her apartment building goes missing, and it turns into this like apocalyptic plot that you just think, how did I get from point A to point B? But it's a pretty great book, and I recommend it if you haven't tried that one. So that's what I've got for you tonight. Thomas Mulkeen, My Killer Doesn't Understand Me. What I don't understand is this title. Doesn't really make any sense, but it's got good cover art and fun light writing. Okay, thank you. Have a good night. Bye.